right, guys, welcome back to the Power Up Project. My name is Jason Tharp, and I am joined today by a very special person, Keith Tatum, who happens to be one of my dearest friends, who has been, I don't even know how to explain it without getting emotional, just he's been there, and I appreciate that. To kind of give you a little idea of a little bit about Keith, he's a design lead at Slalom. He is really focused on human-centered design. He's going to talk a little bit about that and let us know what that means. He's a creative problem solver. He's an awesome dad. He's an awesome human. He is an avid hiker, getting one with nature, getting one with himself. And I just want to jump right in and just welcome you. Thanks for coming in and agreeing to do this.
You bet.
And so I just want to jump into the first question. Let's pretend we don't know each other.
Okay, I'll try.
And I'm in Columbus and I'm holding a sign that just says, I need inspiration. And for whatever reason, you feel compelled in this busy street to beeline over to me. What would be one thing that you could tell me about your life or work that would inspire me?
All right. So the setup is you're holding up a sign, you need inspiration, and I'm responding to the call.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a
Based
good
on
one.
your story or your work, like what would be?
If you needed inspiration from me, I think the first thing I would do is probably grab you by the arm and have you go out to the woods with me. Not in a weird way. But if we were trying to unpack that, and I'm always curious, I like to say, okay, well, tell me more about that. I think we would start out in the woods on a hike. And, there's probably many reasons why that's good. I think that would set us both at ease and give us a chance to have a conversation. You mentioned at the top end of this that my job is in human-centered design. So I think part of what I foster in that professional role and hopefully in my personal life is empathy for others. So I just think if you were looking for inspiration, we could quickly get at the heart of what type of inspiration you were looking for. Was it something to feed your soul? Is it something to feed your creative mind? I know that you and I are both blessed and cursed with very creative minds. I'm sure that your listeners and anybody that follows you on any of the social channels sees how important creativity is to you. So yeah, I think, not knowing I was going to be asked that question, I think I'd start with my curiosity. Like, okay, let's talk about inspiration. Right. Like, what does inspiration mean to you? And then that would give me a little more opportunity to work through that conversation and figure out what might resonate with you.
Yeah. And in my experience with you, one of the amazing qualities that you have is your curiosity. Like you have a very unique ability, and I don't even know if you're aware of, asking questions that aren't blanket statements, but that feel like in true presence, right? And I'm just curious, like where does that curiosity come from? Was it something when you were a kid? Is it something that you learned? Like what's the root of?
Yeah. It's probably relatable. I know it's relatable for you because, we've talked about this, your childhood and what my childhood was like. There's a lot of parallels between us. I think I was always very imaginative. And when I say that, I mean, I had no shortage of imagination. It's not hard for me, still isn't hard for me to see things in my head first. And I think I really lucked out being able to grow up in a household where, art and creativity was something that was present. My dad was a bit of an artist, though, wasn't something that he pursued very far into his adulthood, as a father. But I know when he was younger, did a lot of creative things. My brother was able to draw, and it's something that I've done my entire life. So I think when you have limitless like pictures in your mind, you're just, it's so easy for me to pull on a curiosity thread because there's so many things that I can approach with the beginner's mind. Like that's the great thing about honestly being alive is you can be curious about anything. And I think sometimes I wonder what it's like for people that don't rely or don't identify as having such a strong imaginative or creative mind. I've always gotten labeled as a creative.
Right.
So have you.
Yeah.
It's showed up in our job descriptions. I was a creative director at one point in my career, which is kind of a crazy thing to think about. But I guess I just have this insatiable curiosity and creative thinking, creative expression, creative conversations, I think allow me to explore all those things. A lot of people will call, you use like the word jack of all trades. There's so many things. I picked up a term a few years back. There was a TED Talk by this person named Emily Wamnack, I think, if I got her name right. She wrote a book on multi-potentialites, kind of a made-up word, but people with many potentials. And I think what I figured out in my late 20s is that it was okay to give myself permission to have lots of potentials. And so because of that, I think curiosity goes hand in hand with that. If you give yourself permission to be anything and to try lots of things, experimenting is always a theme that you and I talk about. Like, try this, I've tried this, I'm thinking about trying this, whether it's related to health or habits or, food or exercise or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think I've just given myself permission to be curious. It's okay to not be one thing. And I know that's relatable for you. And the point that I want to make that goes along with that is, I think a lot of times we also get frustrated with ourselves. We feel like we stop and start lots of things. And, I did have a period in my life where I was just frustrated. I felt like I was trying all these things, but nothing ever got finished. And so that led me down the path of just like, okay, if I'm going to experiment with something, how can I remove some of the constraints or the barriers to actually get something done so that I feel a sense of accomplishment? So, yeah, I think clearly curiosity and empathy and experimentation, like all those things are kind of wound up together.
I think it's interesting in the fact that, like, I feel like from my experience, it's almost like they've become building blocks of ways that we can undo stuff, right? And I know that you have, you've seen many versions of me. I've seen many versions of you.
Yep.
What role, in your early, like, trying to figure out Keith, did that curiosity play? Was there a moment where you kind of learned that, like, oh, I can trust this, or this can't get any worse, but maybe this felt like my safe zone. This is what you knew.
Yeah, I wish it were something easy to put a dotted line back in my childhood. I really feel like it's more in my adulthood that I really started to understand that experimentation with something maybe that I haven't tried or that's new to me is it's also the path to move forward or to move out of a place in my life where I was stuck. And I think the other thing that I started to learn probably in my 30s is that along with experimentation, it was also okay to fail at things, to try, because in my opinion, if you have failed at something, even if you've failed miserably, like, oh God, why did I even bother doing that? It's evidence that you tried it. And I think for me, in my parts of my adulthood, there were just moments where I wasn't trying many things, and so I would sit and think about things. I would get anxious about things, but there was no do. So there had to be action. And I think I can think about, like what it was like when, even more recently, when the pandemic rolled around, and then all these events that related to it. It's hard not to think of them all as like one triggered thing. But I can say over the past 3 years that, there's been many things from a timeline standpoint where I had to figure out how to experiment my way to get on the other side of that.
Right.
And that runs the gamut with like things that happened with jobs that went away, almost overnight when the pandemic started to, I don't know if you know this, I have a friend who had brain cancer, that was diagnosed with brain cancer,
so, yeah.
and making sense of that. I had my own little run-in with skin cancer, and, I had a big hole in my nose, and that was new territory for me. I mean, but those are all examples of, you and I talk a lot about resilience as like a skill. And I think experimentation is a way to build up resilience, to get through some of the tougher things that happen in life, and, maybe not so tough things.
Do you use that experimenting to like, does somebody that maybe is new to this idea of experimenting, like if I'm somebody that's, I'm going to, I know you, but I'm going to assume that I don't know you for a second here, that you aren't in touch with your emotions, right? But you desperately are feeling a need to change. Like, how would you explain to somebody what it means to experiment into, and how to learn from your emotions and learn from what you're feeling in the present moment? Like, what are some things that you would recommend that they try that's worked for you?
Yeah, like specifically to emotional stuff.
Yeah, because I mean, I think a lot of our stuff, whether it's kid stuff or adult stuff or whatever, it all comes down to how we feel about the situation. Like, and I know that you are definitely a problem solver, and I know that you're very big into solving other people's problems.
Yeah.
But I'm curious of how you would explain how you go about it for yourself.
Yeah. More on the emotional side of things for me. I'm getting better at experimenting with that. I think, for anybody that's listening to this, the easiest way that I can describe the experiment is the first thing that you have to do is make room to understand what emotions you might be experiencing. And the fact of the matter is, we are so good at distracting ourselves with everything else going on in life and letting chaos sort of take over, that it's really hard to even be aware or present enough to realize, oh, I might be experiencing some type of depression or a depressed state, or I feel some sadness, or something really is constantly irritating me, when you don't make room to spend, I think a lot of people are afraid to spend quiet contemplative time with themselves because they're like, I don't know where this could go, and it might stir up some really unexpected or undesirable feelings or emotions that I'm not fully prepared to deal with, or I don't have time, or I'd rather avoid them altogether. So I think the first thing that you can do, the first experiment is, how can I make more time to be present enough to understand and to experience or feel some of the emotions and give myself permission to feel them? You might have the desire to not feel so sad, but I think it's okay to feel sad and accept the fact that you are feeling sad and make room for it. Go be sad. You know, if you don't want to be sad around others, then remove yourself from a situation. Go spend some time. I've been out in the woods hiking by myself, and I'll be thinking about something, and then I start to think a little bit deeper about it, and I just kind of allow myself to have those feelings. That's probably the best start. But I think everybody is so busy filling every square minute of the day up with distractions that, and there's so many things that can distract you. Social media is a big one for a lot of people. And I've really tried, when Instagram first became a thing, I spent an unhealthy amount of time on Instagram. And I know everyone has their own threshold and limits, but I've really tried to spend much more time away from it. It's a hard one. It's, I know, I think in terms of habits and, I'll give you an example. I had a realization one day. I was getting ready to put on my shoes to go for a walk, and I picked up my phone, and I realized without even looking that my hand was on the Instagram icon. So I had built up such a repetitive behavior with my phone, and an unhealthy amount of my morning ritual was starting out my day looking at Instagram and absorbing all kinds of things. Some things would make me laugh, other things would make me envious, other things might, all the kind of stuff that gets shared on social media. I say all that to, just, you've got to experiment with making, not taking time. You have to make the time to get more in touch with, what you're dealing with, what you're feeling.
Yeah.
It's no secret. Some of the best times that I have are when I lace up my shoes and head to the woods, and it's either on my own, which I do a lot, or with a good friend. We've had lots of really mutually beneficial talks, right? Yeah. We unpack a lot of times what we're feeling.
Yeah.
Very real stuff. And I think, there's probably a lot of people that are terrified to go do that, but it's really healthy.
Yeah. I think it's interesting that as I'm like listening to this and reflecting on a lot of the walks we've had and advice you've given me over the time, and thinking about our group of friends that know us is kind of like the jokers. Mm-hmm. And I just I kind of like picture a little giggle in my head of like, wow, these guys are being serious. Like, what the hell? And I think that, being that kid with the creative mind and finding all those like humor points and all those things, and like you said, experiments and stuff like that, like the making the time to do it is like, I think you nailed it. Like that's the most important part.
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
it involves all parts of you in those moments. Like, and I think that maybe if you could, because I know when you started this process of like really kind of diving into the walks and the talking to yourself and all these different things, and, as you know, with me, I'm a huge believer in like the root is all of our emotions. Like when you had those things, like, was there a way to do it right? Maybe somebody that's trying to do it, like experiment and, any words of encouragement for somebody starting out, like that maybe stumbles that you had or shit you've had to deal with that you didn't think that would work out the way it did, and you felt the wrong emotions, or just something that you can kind of give people the idea that like they're not alone in this process.
Getting back to what we were talking about earlier, I've given myself permission to get it wrong. So I don't really think any of the experimentations with stuff sticks or it doesn't. If something works for you or it helps you get the result that you want, whether it's related to exercise or changing a habit or, I want to stop doing this unhealthy thing. I've given myself permission. So they're all beneficial. I think, maybe my advice in there is be a little bit kinder to yourself. You're trying to figure it out, and no one has the answer for how to solve whatever they're dealing with. They have to look to experiment, to move. You got to take an action. And that means I've done everything. I mean, I write things down. I laughed a little bit when you said talking to yourself, because people were probably like listening to this going, what does he mean? He's talking to himself. But I literally I'll take my phone with me. Here's an easy experiment for anyone. There are free apps. There's a Dolby app. They're known for audio and acoustics. They have a free app that it just happens to record really good audio, even if there's ambient sound in the background, like your feet shuffling in the gravel while you're on a hike or the wind blowing and all these other things. But one of the things I've experimented with often is if I'm really trying to solve something, whether it's for me, working out something for my family, a decision that I have to make, a problem that I'm trying to solve for at work with a colleague or, something of that nature, I will have a conversation with myself. And I think a lot of people would be like, that sounds kind of crazy. But my argument for that experiment is no one cares about your problem more than you do. Mm-hmm. No one will ever. I mean, we can be caring, we can be empathetic, but at the end of the day, what you lay down in bed with in your mind is only it's only significant to you. So my hypothesis in that experiment is why can't you have just as meaningful of a conversation with yourself as you do with others? Because it's a great way to go through the dress rehearsal of what you're thinking and say it out loud. And when you capture it, and so all I do is wear like the standard iPhone headphones that have a mic right here, so it picks up the sound. But you don't stop there. You don't just record it just for the sake of saying it. You make time to go back and listen to it and go, oh, that's interesting. That's what I said. There must be something more behind that. It allows you to be just as curious as you are when you're having a conversation with somebody. So that's just like, I write it down, I record it. I carve time out to think about it. I visualize it. I make time to say it out loud to other people. That's the hard one, right? Because sometimes we just want to solve problems. But when you get it out there in the open for evaluation, you get outside of your own head and you have a chance to hear what other people think. And you can you can glom their experience onto yours. Maybe they have something that's relatable that they can help you solve with. But I've been experimenting with, your whole show is based around putting your attention on your intention. And for whatever reason, all these, we've talked about this before, where sometimes you get all these signs or signals that unless you're so distracted and not present, you don't see them. But when you are present and when you're more mindful and when you're in the mode of trying to experiment your way through the things that you're dealing with, it's crazy how things come together. So I wrote them down, because I always like to visualize like what's on or in my mind. But so real quick, over the past 2 or 3 weeks, I have been sitting at the intersection of what does it look like when you experiment with more awareness around your breath. I know that it's like, why on earth are you unpacking that? But getting back to the curiosity, I'm like, this is something that I've never really stopped and thought about. But when you stop and you think about it and you're willing to be more curious about it and pull on the threads, that's one of my favorite metaphors because you never know where that's going to go. So I'm on a 30-day streak with guided meditations. And so I use the Insight Timer app on my iPhone. And these are people from all over the globe that will walk you through 15-minute, 20-minute guided meditation. A lot of these are based on breathing and body awareness and so forth. So I've been 30-day streak. I've been keeping track of, I haven't missed a morning. And that's a big deal. If you think about how busy we all are, I know you're big into meditation and carving out time in your mornings. And I think I even heard your previous podcast guest was talking about how he made time in his morning. So it's that. I heard a podcast about breathing. I ended up watching a Netflix documentary on it's called The Deepest Breath. It's about deep diving.
Oh, I saw that. Yeah. It's my list. Yeah. Deep dive. Yeah.
You got to watch that. It's really cool. And then I listened to another podcast, and this illustrator, Misha, illustrated this book on visualizing transformative power of breathing. And I heard it on a podcast, and I'm like, she was talking about illustrating the book.
Yeah.
And of course I was like, that sounds really creative. Yeah. And I ordered it like immediately on Amazon. And it's great because it's all visualized with really fantastic illustrations.
We'll make sure we put a link in the show notes there too.
At any rate, all these forces came together. And that made me really curious about our breath. And so I started trying to understand the impact of breathing on our physiology and its power to, when you intentionally slow down your breathing, you trigger the vagus nerve and your parasympathetic nervous system. It's a signal to your body to say, I'm safe, everything's clear, I can calm down now. And it'll slow down your heart rate. There's a difference between fight or flight, which is, when your adrenaline's pumping, your heart rate increases, you start to sweat, your pupils get bigger. You're in danger. And I think a lot of people live in that stressful state with their body all day long. So as I started to try to fill my brain in a beginner's mind, I learned more about the physiology. I learned about all these amazing techniques that you can practice. A lot of people are probably familiar with box breathing. You've heard of that, like SWAT teams and military people, SEAL training. They do box breathing because they're often in highly intense situations and their ability to make quick decisions. But so just being curious about that, it's opened up like 1,000 doors to my mind. I also learned that nasal breathing is the optimal way to breathe. So we spend a lot of time mouth breathing. Like when we exercise, when we get overexerted, we're like, and that's an inefficient way to oxygenate your blood and your cells, which that's how you help with healing. That's how you help with inflammation. That's what, you repair when you rest and recover. So, the point in there is that through slowing down, through meditating, through experimenting with all these things that I've picked up along the way, these souvenirs, it's given me more room in my mind and in my spirit with my whatever I'm dealing with emotionally, whatever I'm dealing with physically, to practice what I'm doing with breathing and change the physiology of my body, help me move away from stress and anxiety into a more calm state. It helps aid with digestion. It helps with your blood pressure. It helps increase your sleep. There's another book called The Oxygen Advantage, which I'm just now listening to that. That was one of those threads that I pulled. And there are all these nasal breathing techniques, like everything from taping your mouth closed when you sleep so that you train your body to breathe through your nose. The thing that popped out at me, the reason why I picked up that audiobook, if you can pick up an audiobook, I don't read books as much as I do listen to them because I try to do several things at once. The thing that made the most sense to me, the eureka that got me going on this topic was your nose is designed for breathing. Your mouth is designed for eating and vocalizations.
Yeah.
And so for us to be spending all of our time breathing through our mouths, there's something, really scientific and physiological about this that's fascinating to me. So, that's just an example of just being curious about something that you don't know about. And when you start finding some of the details, in my case, I visualize them, right? So it's easy for me to see the connections and the dots. But yeah, I feel like when you and I get together, we always have something that we're like working on, right? An experiment that we're running, or something that we're test driving. And you're either sharing the results of your experiment, or you need more like feedback, or I need more feedback. So yeah, it's all, I think it's all in the spirit of changing your current state. If you want more happiness, what can you experiment with to work your way towards more happiness? If you want to get rid of a bad habit, you have to take action. You can't just simply have the desire in your mind that you want to stop doing that. And the experiments are an enabler. They're small. I like to break things down at an atomic level. So for anybody who hasn't read Atomic Habits or listened to that audiobook, the book is very much about that. It's not just having the desire to change things and set these big lofty goals. You have to create a system at an atomic level to make those changes happen. And that's what my experiments are all about.
Yeah, I think what's really amazing about what your experimentation, we both experiment in vastly different ways. But what's interesting about it is the same things tend to happen. You know, whether we are visualizing or we're breathing or we're doing meditations and stuff like that, you're holding an image in your head, and you do these amazing mind maps, which still to this day has been like that aha breakthrough to me. It was like, holy crap, you mean I can just draw this stuff out?
Right.
You know,
I can see what I'm
yeah,
thinking.
Instead of me trying to flip all the pages in my head to get to it.
Mm-hmm.
And to me, what I kind of realized in that was it's kind of a form of like you're attracting what you want. And it's like you said, it's like in these experiments, you may not even have known that you needed the breath work, but somewhere along the way, subconsciously or whatever, when you started that path, those things show up, you know. And you know, I know that when I had my brain thing, you had your skin thing, you know, it is that jar yourself awake kind of moments and stuff like that. And you know, I'm curious, is like how, because we both kind of bounced back from both things. I know that you started, you know, taking care of yourself better. You started being aware of.
Yeah.
What role does fear, like, of that awakening state happen in that process of the experiment? Do you find that you're more likely to experiment from something that you are, oh shit, or do you experiment in stuff that you feel comfortable in? Like, has that changed in the process? If that makes sense.
I know exactly what you're saying. To me, fear is there for us. Nothing grabs your attention more than fear. And when you're more intentional and you're more present and you're more aware, you can recognize that fear is the signal. It's a survival technique. In your case, fear was a big one when you were delivered, you know, the blow on your brain cancer. Fear for me, when I sat up in the office and thought, you know, they were just scraping a microscopic layer of skin off my face, and they handed me a mirror and said, "We'll be right back. We'll give you a minute to, you know, kind of gather your thoughts." And when I looked into the mirror and saw a gigantic hole, you know, on the bridge of my nose in the middle of my face, those impactful, fear-filled moments cut through all the noise of the distraction. And I think, fortunately, we have those moments. They suck because they're painful. There's a lot of emotions that go along with them. But it's a strong enough signal to really grab a hold of our attention. But you have to be willing to listen to what fear is telling you. And you also have to develop a way to turn that fear signal into something that you're going to take action on.
Yeah.
And if I think back, you know, towards the top of the conversation, I think people are so great at running all the interference that even fearful signals don't mean anything. They're like numb to a really fearful, like your life is in jeopardy.
Yeah. Yeah.
But the good news is, I guess there's good news in there. Those fearful signals exist for a reason, but I also have many that aren't associated with something big, overwhelming, life-threatening. I can simply say, I'd like to breathe better.
Yeah.
I'd like to feel better. I'd like to calm myself down. You know, if you think of the small interactions that I might have throughout my workday, they can cause anxiety. They can cause an elevation in heart rate. They can cause frustration. They can just conversations, reactions to something that you've created and shared with somebody, something that simple. But I have the ability to bounce back. I think I have the hypothesis.
Yeah.
So, the experimenting part about it is I think the point that we're discovering in there is that you have a desired outcome, whether you can name it right away. Once you start to deal with something really stressful or anxiety inducing or fear inducing, you want to change your state. I don't want to feel like this.
Yeah.
So you have a desired state. And when I think about experiments, you've got a hypothesis. I think this, but I think it might be this. So, I think I want to not be terrified and live my life in fear might be. So yeah, there is a desired outcome. I don't just experiment for the sake of experiment.
Yeah.
Maybe sometimes I do a little bit, like just play. That's play or creativity or.
Well, I do have an experiment to kind of wrap this up. This question here.
Let's try it.
So you're well aware of how I define a power up. So let's take a time machine. You can go back to any point in Keith's life, knowing what you know now. Mm-hmm. Doesn't matter what age or whatever. What sort of power up would you give yourself, and why would you give that advice, power up to that person?
Yeah. I think many of the themes that have popped up in this conversation in my 20s, I graduated from college, just a couple years out of college. I lost my dad at a very young age. In fact, what's kind of crazy is he died when he was 53. And so I'm 52. Mm. So sometimes I'll have that thought, and, not that I'm not him, he's not me. We have very different lives. And trust me, I've experimented with lots of things in a positive way that my dad didn't, that would have helped him. But I look back on the years just after my dad passed away. I think I was around 26. Sometimes it's just a blur, it's hard to remember dates and times when, you have a part of your life that gets kind of, the best way I can visualize it or describe it is I had a few years where it was just a smeared blur, and I don't remember a lot of the nuances or the details that I remember now. But my power up I would have given myself the gift of the ability to be present, to be able to definitely deal with things more in the moment. Because I think, like any human being, when you're dealing with grief that comes at you really fast, it's overwhelming. You don't know how to process it. You don't want to think about it. You disengage. I mean, I shut myself off from friends. I really was in a dark spot in my life. So I think for me, that would be where I point the power up. Mm-hmm. Just like the way that I'm able to deal with, not that I'm great at dealing with everything in my life, but I have better coping mechanisms. I have better practices. I am more intentional with how I spend my time and making sure that I'm looking after my emotional well-being, my mental well-being, I remember days where I just wouldn't eat. I wasn't hydrated, like all the wrong things that you can do to your body when you just want to escape how you're feeling. Mm-hmm. That's probably relatable to a lot of people, but yeah, that's where I would point my power up, definitely.
Well, that's amazing, man. Well, I can just speak for old Keith, and I could tell you that I think that version of you would be very proud of how far you've come.
Yeah, thanks, man.
And guys, if any part of Keith's story has inspired you in any way, any stuff we've talked about here, make sure you share this. This is how we're going to have the impact that we're hoping to have here. I'm going to link these cool, the book, if I can talk Keith into letting me share his mind map that he has laid out in front of him here on social and stuff like that. Are there, if somebody wants to learn more about your story, are there links that they should follow for you? Like, what are some things that they could find you in your shenanigans?
Probably track me out in the woods on a hike in a metro park around Columbus. Yeah, I used to have an easy answer to that.
Yeah.
I would have wanted you to follow me on Instagram, and I would have immediately pointed you at social media, but I still experiment a little bit there, but those are really just creative activities and things like that. So I'm going to give you the gift of not letting me distract you. You get a break from following me in social media. You're left to your own devices with your own habits. But I'm not intentionally having anybody follow.
Sure. Well, I just, to wrap up, I just want to, like to celebrate you and just thank you for just always being there. I don't know if there's another human besides Becky who has seen me at the highs and lows. And I hope that people out there listening have many Keiths in their life. And I am so happy that you're part of my life and in this world. So I appreciate that. And with that, I'm just going to wrap this up and say thank you for tuning into the Power Up Project. We hope it helps.
Foxland Media. Think big.